all for being here at the Parking Garage Task Force meeting, Friday, August 16th, 9 a.m. If we can just quickly go around the table and introduce ourselves. Sharon Lynn, City Manager.
Bob Cartwright, representing the business community.
Rick Perry, representing the Planning Commission.
Steve Sheffer, Commissioner.
Kathy Osterholm.
Ken Swartz, Fire Company.
Linda Kaufman, Parking Committee.
Very good, thank you. So we have approval of the minutes. If you've had a chance to look at them, and any comments?
I have a comment.
Question?
I
Yep.
second it.
I have a comment, actually, first. In the new business, discussion concerning the cost per space, Linda Kaufman said the baseline's $20,000 the space. It says Carol Everhart thought it was $50,000. I didn't think that came from Carol. I thought that came from a resident.
Okay.
Yeah, and I forget the resident. I think it was maybe that Carol Warner, but I don't think it was Carol.
Okay.
Did you get that?
Yep. We'll check on that, Margaret. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Any correspondence? Margaret?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And old business, continuation of discussion from our meeting on July 12th. So basically, we spoke pretty much in depth about the next steps forward and where we need to be as far as whether or not this project will turn out to move forward with what we're trying to accomplish here. In the meantime, I did speak with Jed Hatfield from Colonial Parking, the president of Colonial Parking. Spoke to him on the phone, and then on August 5th, I actually met with Jed here. Also present were folks from EDIS who brought them in originally. Mike Wigley was here as well, the architect for the City Hall complex, and Director of Public Works, Kevin Williams, Evan Miller, Projects Coordinator, was present, as well as Max Hamby, the IT Coordinator. So basically the purpose of that meeting was to advise Jed what we had spoken about at our last meeting in July, to talk and to have a recommendation from him, if he was able to do that, and what actually was needed, if anything, and if we could move forward with the parking garage as it exists, as City Hall, the complex exists today, talking about the infrastructure, talking about the subsurface with the fiber leading to our communications and emergency dispatch, the issues in the fire department, and the issue with the water tower as well. So basically, and I'll ask Kevin to go a little more in depth, but basically the answer was you can move forward. And as long as you're not defeating the purpose of the concrete construction and going underneath that, it's possible to move forward and deal with the issues as they arise. So Kevin, would you just give a brief synopsis, wherever you're comfortable? Kevin, of course, knows the engineering part and can speak to that.
Sure. So, and I think you hit the main points. But we were very fortunate to have the designer of this building happen to be there for another meeting. So we held on to him, and he attended this with us with the parking guys. And they confirmed for us that the storm drain infrastructure that we were a little concerned with last time, and the fiber optic underground stuff, it can be accommodated. They can do their foundation system such that they can avoid some and relocate others. So there would be an additional cost associated with that. We presented or gave those ideas to the, I'm forgetting the name of the parking folks.
Jed.
Jed.
Hatfield Plumbing.
Yeah, so let him know that, and he said, well, okay, they can factor that into their calculus as to whether or not, you know, those additional costs would play into their model and whether it'd be cost effective for them to do that, but acknowledge that they could physically do the work over there and accommodate the underground infrastructure.
Great. And we did talk a little to Max, and, you know, Max last time made the comment that, you know, he wasn't very comfortable with the fact that we would have to uproot any of the fiber optic, but I think, and here's Max now, but if, Max, you can just speak to the fact of the meeting that we had with Jed from Colonial Parking and the issue that you had with the fiber optics, and maybe being able to move our emergency systems back to the county dispatch where we lived, if you will, for the 2 years when we were under construction here.
Correct, and to be perfectly blunt, we haven't checked with the county to see if that would even be a possibility at this time, but I don't see why we wouldn't be able to. They've been very, you know, accommodating in the past. Regarding the meeting, you know, there were, you know, several discussions about could it be, you know, done without, you know, messing with the infrastructure. Obviously, we're looking at the, you know, minimizing the impact on what's established already by, you know, construction means. So if that's the case, then obviously we're always concerned about a possible accidental cut of the fiber, which would take us down, you know, in an emergency situation. So that's as much as we can do to minimize that. That's kind of where the talks ended. So.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add one thing? In the interest of not to use the word negative, but the concern of the fiber optic, is this also maybe the right time for that to be somehow switched, that in the event of something major happening in town, that could, right now, we're planning that in an emergency, you can switch that to Georgetown right away and take our people there. In the event we had a tsunami or we had some sort of a major type of a disaster, we're able to throw the switch, and we plan for that to be able to go there. So it's a backup emergency 911 center in the event it would ever be needed.
That's already a situation.
That
as it
is established?
We have a fold-down procedure as well for emergency situations. But once again, that's not something you want to have to rely on in a situation such as a construction zone. You know, it's not without problems, you know. It's a redundancy that we have, and we do test it periodically, and it's maintained by the state. But once again, you don't plan on using the redundancies.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would just, I wanted to mention, the concern that the neighbors have had, or the neighbor had in the fire department, to make sure that their issues are all accommodated. I think that's very important, that they're able to get to their fuel tank, that their meter and electric service is not impacted, and also access to their building. Because everyone, regardless whether it's the local fire department or any neighbor, should also be accommodated and make sure that's taken care of, so that there's no hard feelings. Everybody's on the same page. The design's there. We're not affecting them. I just wanted to point that out, that's right out of the gate, that's understood, that electric service and those issues, that fuel tank, et cetera, that's going to be accommodated.
Well, certainly. I mean, that's first and foremost, and that's why there's a seat at the table for the fire department, because if this project does move forward and, you know, get underway as far as construction, it's going to be an inconvenience, like any construction project is for all of us, including the fire department, and we would, you know, want their input, and we can't have, you know, stop emergency services, you know, just because we're under construction in our own space here. So that certainly would be considered.
Okay, thank you.
I just want a clarification from Max. So what I've heard, which I think is reasonable, is that we don't want to have an accidental cut or break, because that would disrupt the 911 services. But then I'm also hearing that we do have a backup redundancy plan. Might not be the most convenient to implement, but if we already have that in place, doesn't that doesn't that lessen the concern we should have? I mean, that's not to say we let the contractors willy-nilly do whatever they want, but if we have a backup plan, then it shouldn't rise to the level of, like, this is a 10 out of 10 problem that we have because we have a backup.
Well, don't forget that I'm speaking, we've talked about the 911 system, but we also have city communications that aren't related to the 911 system also affected in that situation, and that we don't necessarily have a backup. We would be scrambling to have that situation. Our main connection to the rest of the city and our outlying remote facilities is through that fiber.
So to his point then, is that something we should look at as if this moves forward, that you also have a backup plan for your city communications?
I have backup plans, but they will not as much capacity as the fiber, obviously. So I would be looking to put in radio transmitters at that point, you know, going back to where we had been prior to having the facilities implemented in that parking area.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I just, when we talked last time, it was sort of on a 1 to 10, how terrible is this, and it was a 10. What I'm hearing now is that as long as the county does it, and tell me if I'm wrong, but as the county does it, we do have a backup plan, maybe it's not the 10 anymore, maybe it's, you know, it's still a risk, but it's down to some other number.
Well, I think I was speaking more to the impact, so, you know, not necessarily the risk. Obviously, there's risk in everything. So it's risk mitigation, not risk elimination.
Okay.
So that's really where we're at.
Okay.
So we would be scrambling, and we would have to turn things down, I guess. We have, once again, a lot of communication going through. We're not overutilizing what we have, but we've expanded into the capacity that we have with the fiber. If we go back to radio transmitters, which are not capable of moving as much at one time, then we may be dialing services back a little bit. So once again, an impact.
If the fiber line is cut by accident, how long would it take to repair that?
We'd have to have a technician come out, and I'm not sure, we don't have anybody on call for that. So we would probably be looking for one of our vendors to come out and, you know, splice the fiber back together, fuse it back together. So that could take a couple of days. It depends on the availability of the vendor. We do not have anybody on staff internally who would be able to splice, or the equipment to splice the fiber back together.
Is this fiber optic only under the parking garage, or is it also in other public right-of-ways?
Well, ours only exists in this area. Other vendors, Verizon, Comcast, they exist elsewhere in the city.
Now, I guess the question I have, and this may be off topic a little bit, but I mean, if I'm repairing the sidewalk or the street out there, could I hit the fiber optics that affect the city?
Not us, no.
You know, I just want to go back to our discussion last month that right now we're talking about what happens if we cut this line, and we can, you know, maybe plan for it. But really the discussion last month was looking at all the underground infrastructure and to see what's there, you know, how's this going to impact the project, and that's going to add cost to it. And one of the costliest things would be moving that fiber optic or coming up with a backup while they do construction. It's not that far down, and it almost certainly would need to be rerouted or moved or temporarily or whatever, which is going to be a good cost. If he has to go to his backup system, it's really not set up for that, is what he's saying, I'm hearing. So it's not necessarily about being cut, but we do know that it has to be dealt with, and not necessarily from, it's the 911, it's all city infrastructure, and that's there's not extra cable to run around the parking lot temporarily. It just doesn't work that way. Overhead wouldn't work so well because of cranes and other things that they're, you know, give potential. So we just have to know that those costs are there or have to be built into the estimate of the project.
I guess if I could, I understand why you probably don't have a vendor on call and under contract to respond immediately, because the risk generally is relatively low, but couldn't the contractor or couldn't the city on a temporary basis during the construction period arrange to have a vendor under contract who could respond quicker? And secondly, I would think that the contractor's insurance would cover any such event if the contractors cut the line. And so the cost to the city should be minimized by their insurance coverage But we also should think about whether or not the contractor ought to be responsible to ensure that there is emergency response, by whatever vendor the city wants to select, to come in on an almost immediate basis and fix the problem. I mean, I think that's something that could be worked through with a contractor. Yes, there is a cost to that, but I can't imagine they're not accustomed to dealing with that.
Absolutely. With enough time and money, we can do anything.
I just have a question, because the minutes reference that I said to you last month, would you recommend a new building be put above the infrastructure that you discussed with us last month? And you said unequivocally you could not in good conscience recommend that anything be put there. What is your feeling this month, having additional information?
Well, once again, my statement last time was basically we've kind of hit our stride, I think is what the term I used, with the communications that we have available to us now. So, once again, turning off services, in the result of an emergency situation, to lessen the required bandwidth that we would have in that situation, is not ideal, I guess so.
So that's a similar question to Linda's, and Max did say last time that his concern was a 10. I don't know whether it's a 9.5 or a 6 now, but that's difficult.
It's still a concern.
It's still a
concern. But what we did from that point was then to get the architect who
Find out more.
was front and center and very intimate with this building. He was at the table, as was Jed from Colonial Parking, who was not aware of everything that was underneath the parking lot. And I think based on, what Jed said and what we spoke about at that meeting, we came out with a better understanding, not complete understanding, but a better understanding that, yeah, it's possible, as long as we don't go underneath that concrete, that pad that was constructed, correct? And we don't start digging there.
Correct. It's not really, it's not necessarily a concrete pad. It's right underneath the permeable paving.
Okay.
So, but yes, you're
So, I mean, ultimately, our responsibility here is to investigate and get all the information we can to present it. So I think that's what we're doing at this point.
And anyone else? So, thanks, Max. And for those in the audience and anyone listening, we had some late arrivals. Commissioner Schlosser is a member of the task force, and Edward Chanowski also, so they're here at the table. We talked so far several months about, the possibilities. I think we don't necessarily have a complete plan right now, but I think at this time, my recommendation would be to take what we do have to the commissioners at a future workshop meeting, possibly as soon as September, before if you want to move forward with an RFP, before we even do that, to try to give the commissioners an idea right now of where we are. Is that anything?
I have to be honest, I'm sorry I missed the last meeting. I had a death in the family, couldn't be out of town for a while, but we went to the commissioners, and I think it's fine to give them an update, but we went to the mic, please. There is a mic. So we went to the commissioners and said what we want to do is come up and do research as to.
Wait, so we can't hear you.
There's a mic right here. I don't know what to say.
That's not on, it's that one.
It's the little one. It's the green, yeah. So, is that better? Okay. So we went to the commissioners and we said we want to do research and come to you with, kind of an approach, pros and cons. So it feels a little bit like at the first meeting, we decided we were going to come up with a high-level RFP or statement of objectives, and from that, we would get information back from providers of this particular service, building parking garages, running parking garages, and then take a complete research to the Board of Commissioners, and the Board of Commissioners said, yep, that sounds great, do that. And so now it just, and again, I missed a meeting, so I could very well be missing some of the intent or something that came out in the last meeting that significantly changed this. But that we left that first meeting with a group coming together to put together an RFP. And so I'm wondering, did that happen? And do we have an RFP? Because if so, I think it would be worth at least taking that concept and some of the components of that to the Board of Commissioners, along with an update on what we've learned so far. So that's where I'm
Two
gonna ask that
things.
question, yeah.
We have been working, we've got
Okay.
the bones of it put
Great.
together.
Okay.
I think the challenge is at this point is, based on the last meeting,
Right.
the investigation and discovery that there is so much underground stuff
Right.
could change the commissioner's mind. And so that's the question that we have at this point is, knowing there's now the risk to infrastructure, to, the 911 call center and all those
Right.
things.
Sure.
Do the commissioners still want us to pursue it? Because what we don't want to do for the integrity of the city and whatever is put the RFP out there and then have the commissioners be saying, oh, we didn't know those things. And then we say to all those people that took the time to reply to an RFP, just kidding. It doesn't help the integrity of the city for future RFPs if you get that
That's fair.
reputation. So I think that's the discussion we have at this point is the discovery of the information that we have enough to take it back and say to the commissioners, just so that you know, there's these risks. Do you want us to still go forward?
Okay.
Versus you gave us a blessing before and we've discovered all this stuff. So
Exactly.
So I guess,
And I think that's important, so
I think
they,
you're right.
so they know
I
that.
think I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for explaining it that way. That sounds really right to me. I'd rather have over communication than under communication, so for sure. But do you think at that point, well, I wonder what this group thinks when we make are we gonna just take this information to the Board of Commissioners? Or are we gonna say, okay, here's what we found, but we recommend that we still go forward to get more information with an RFP? So
Well,
that's a question.
I think that's a discussion we need to have.
Okay.
So based on what we know now and what we briefly spoke about today, do we feel that there's enough momentum in knowing what we know? And certainly there's a lot of the unknown until we move into this a little more. Do we want to take that to the commissioners and say, what is our recommendation?
Do we have, because recall what we spoke about last time, is making up a list of those key points between last meeting and this meeting. And at this meeting, we would review those key points, make sure that we're all in line. So, and those key points wouldn't be wasted if we were gonna go forward. A lot of that would be meat for the RFP, so it wasn't just something to take to the commissioners, it would actually be work. So do we have that list of key points? If we discuss that first, then maybe at the end we could take a vote or just get everybody's opinion on what we really think about the project at that point.
Well, and just adding to that, because that was my assumption also with this meeting, that there were going to be key points that would be part of the RFP that we would discuss, but the other request that was made last meeting, if I'm not mistaken, was that we be able to review those points prior to the meeting so that we weren't coming in blind and trying to discuss something we hadn't had time to process.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I fully expected that when we came to this meeting that we were gonna have at least a draft of an RFP to look at. Because I think that identifies a lot of the issues for us to consider. A list of the pros and cons is another way of doing it, but I was sort of surprised that we weren't at that point because I thought we were scheduling this meeting a week or so later than we ordinarily would meet in order to provide the time to do that.
So what we did in between the last meeting and this meeting, and we needed a little more time, not necessarily to do the RFP, but to come up with a draft, which Commissioner Sheffer and Linda and myself, we talked about it, we met, and then Commissioner Sheffer came up with a draft of objectives and outcomes. And we needed this first before we would, then look at preparing an RFP. But in the mix of that also was the fact that we did not know, and whether or not it was even, possible for us to move forward with any RFP until we talk to somebody at least, and we only have one proposal or quasi-proposal, if you will. So we have this, is this something that you would like to
Well,
talk about? The
I
points?
mean, I think if we could make copies, because it'd be hard to talk from that without the people having benefit.
Okay.
But the thing is, that'll have to be modified based on what you recently learned as far as how do we treat that risk of being disrupting the emergency services and the other, daily business services that come into and go outside this, and the note on the back is
Okay.
irrelevant. But just as a reminder, because I get stopped sometimes and people say, okay, so I'm really upset because I'm waiting for the equipment to show up to start building this parking garage. And so we are way in the early stages of anything we're doing here. And so I applaud Sharon and Kevin and Max and others who have been working diligently to look at what roadblocks could exist that could cause us to completely change this. But a decision has not been made that we're building a parking garage. And so there's so many things that have to be decided. So I'm hopeful that with the information that we've started to assemble that provide the objectives and high-level outcomes, coupled with the recent information that we've learned, that we could pull that together. We have, the city has a framework that it uses for its request for proposals, so we would have to embed this in this. And basically go back to the commissioners and the mayor and say, hey, this is what we know now. A month ago, when we talked about this, I would have said, we're done. But now I think I'm very hopeful that we can at least proceed with gathering information that will inform us as we make other recommendations as to whether having pursuing some type of a mobility center in town is consistent with the other things from a overall perspective of what we need to do with traffic management and parking.
And one of the things also that Jed brought up, and this I think is important to the industry, and maybe Linda knows more about that. Thank you. So Colonial Parking is big in the industry, a key player in the industry around here, or maybe even on the East Coast. And Jed said, with the possibility of this moving forward, what many folks would not want, including Colonial Parking, if they were to bid on this, is to come forward with an RFP, and then they take the due diligence to respond to that RFP, and then it backfires in some way because there is a lot involved in that. So he's just one individual, I know, speaking for his company, but it's happened in other municipalities locally here. So Dover had an RFP, Newark had an RFP for a parking garage, and they pulled it off the table. So just food for thought. It was something that he brought up that was a piece of information.
Well, I'm sorry, Lisa. Just as a thought, because I like the idea of at least advising the commissioners of an updated information of what you have gotten, because as Steve said, last month, there's no way we can do this because of our infrastructure. If the steps would be to go to the commissioners with that updated information, with more of it's a possibility. Now, do you want us to go forward and develop information for an RFP? That would at least provide an okay from the commissioners saying, okay, last month you told us we really shouldn't do it. This month you're telling us there's a possibility, do we or do we not want to go forward, before all the RFP information goes back to them. Do you see what I'm saying? Do a first step with just approval first, and then work. As Steve said, there's no rush in any of this. And there's other possibilities, that additional signage, that things that could help move traffic. We don't even know what those possibilities could be, and if we don't need to rush, then It's not like this has to be out next month.
No, but I do think that we can be on a parallel path. You know, we can continue to get input from, you know, all of the brain power we have around this table on if we were to go forward, you know, does this make sense? Do we need to add things, delete things, modify things? And so that we're not way behind if the mayor and the board of commissioners says that, you know, we want to explore. And all along, I've said, as Sharon mentioned, that there's no guarantee that what we get from the experts who do this in real life, they're going to be very protective of, you know, things that they do that separate them competitively from others. So, but I believe that if we relied on what we knew about this and the great insights that Linda has, you know, we probably would be, we wouldn't have enough to really put together. And so we're hoping that if we do get some insights, additional insights from the folks who are experts in parking garages, that will help us put together a better RFP ultimately so that we can have competition and get a good price for the.
I want to kind of address that real quick. To the point, I think we're calling this the wrong thing, and I think that's important. I didn't see this first step at going out to industry as a full blown out request for proposal. I saw it more as that we put out a statement of objectives and ask for ideas and concepts back, not a full blown RFP. I don't think we're there yet. An RFP puts the bidders on notice that we want a full blown out thing that costs them a lot of money, and I don't think we're there yet.
No.
We're doing this first phase for more market research to determine if we want to do a full-blown RFP with an intent to actually move forward. I don't think we're there yet.
In the world
so
that I
something
came from,
different.
it was either a source of sought or a request for information.
Yeah, yes, request for information, sorry.
And so, you know, typically there's multiple objectives when that's done. It helps to better identify the real viable companies that can do this stuff.
And what their approach might be, which would actually feed in and inform a full-blown RFP, because there's no way we can know everything in terms of what's current, what's not. Maybe Linda can and others, but I certainly can't. And so you get kind of ideas and concepts from the bidders as the first phase, not a full-blown give us everything down to the project plan, right? I mean, there's this interim step, and I think that's where we are, is to get information, not to solicit somebody to move forward at this point.
And the other thing that is hard to do, and you probably can't do it, is to basically say that a condition of participating in any eventual RFP is that you respond to this. So it's going to be voluntary, and so I'm an optimist. So I think that they'll be able to be creative enough to help us without doing terrible damage to themselves in the competitive process.
The only concern I have, and so you're basically at an extra step, and I think it makes some sense. So, you know, now we're saying request for information before we go to a request for proposal.
Yes.
I don't know how much of the cost you're gonna get in a request for information. And so, and that's one of the critical pieces that we're looking at here is what's the cost to the city?
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe we can structure it in such a way that it's a detailed request for information, but I can tell you that the companies aren't gonna divulge all of their funding and how they're gonna do it and their finance package.
But we've already had one do that, just to play devil's advocate.
Well,
One
yeah, but he
already
didn't go
did
in-
do
He
that.
didn't really share, he may have, I don't think he shared with you.
Well, he's
Carol.
looking for revenue.
I thought there was
piece
a
of
revenue
the-
one.
I mean, he's looking for revenue.
Well, yeah, there
That's-
was, but did he actually go, I saw the whole pro forma, I don't think he shared that with everybody.
Well, it's competitively confidential, right? I mean, so it.
So
it
I don't,
can't
I
be-
just, a thought is, you know, I think one of the things we need out of this is
I agree.
what are the costs to the city? Both hard and soft costs, which is what we put in here. I mean, there will be some
Yeah.
soft costs, but there's also gonna be some hard costs. What are those so that we can present it and say, this parking garage of, 300 spaces is gonna cost the city X amount?
The issue is this project is lukewarm at best at this point. So without going to full RFP, I don't know if we're gonna necessarily get that, but within an RFI, we can at least try to get that information or try to get whether this project is cost neutral for the city in a public-private partnership, whether they would have interest and see it as, I'm a parking garage company, I can make money off of this, so I would be interested in bidding. Those are fair questions to ask without them having to divulge what they think all their costs would be. If we were, and I go back to the comments that were made of, these parking, Colonial does not want these things where these other cities have just done this as a fact finding. They spend a lot of time and a lot of money putting these proposals together. So, we don't necessarily want to make them go through that. So I think it necessitates kind of an interim thing, but I go back to step one here. If that's going to be the idea, and if we want to agree with that, step one was key points. And these are some good objectives in here that would go into that RFP or RFI. I think that's perfect. But I'm still not hearing those key points that we're taking back to the commissioners, such as we've met 4 or 5 times now. It's been met with a dull roar from almost everybody. Nobody's jumping up and down that we need to do that. The considerations at this point are, some people want a traffic study, and maybe we should wait to see if the new wayfinding signs get more people into the parking lot. The parking lot is not full except for between these hours on Saturdays, so we're a little skeptical as, is there even a need here? There are infrastructure issues that we didn't know going into this, but we do now know. There's fiber communication line and there's other infrastructure underground. Those kind of key points. And then our recommendation at that point, as part of those bullets, to say what we'd like to do, if the commissioners want, is we'll go to RFI, or you can say at this point, let's trash it till the wayfinding signs prove otherwise or something like that. So,
And that's why it was important to me, at least, to bring that forward to the commissioners as a group, because we're a task force, so we're a little more than we're trying to formulate to give the information to the commissioners, because they're the ones ultimately that make that decision. So I think, after 4 or 5 meetings that we've had here, it's best to recap, if you will, and just, if for nothing else, to advise the commissioners, where we are at this point, and take the next step, if that's warranted, to put out an RFI for the industry.
Can I ask a process question? And I could be off base, but I would expect that on a monthly basis, when committees are giving their reports to the commissioners, that this would be a part of that. And we're constantly updating the mayor and commissioners on a monthly basis and getting consensus from them during that time.
I can speak from the parking committee. We don't do it every meeting because, we've got 3 meetings of developing stuff before we get to something that's worth presenting. So we don't do it on a monthly basis.
I'm thinking this is more of a commissioner's workshop
It is.
discussion
Yeah.
than the committee report at the main
It's
meeting.
not a sanctioned committee.
Let me make one point, because I think, Kent, you brought up a lot of good points. The dull roar or great acceptance, it all, depends, is that in so many ways is because there's so many questions out there. People are like, is this gonna cost me more money? My taxes just went up, my sewer just went up, what am I gonna be paying for this? So those are the questions that we have to answer before we get support. The other piece of this is, the parking committee is going to once again sort of make their presentation to the commissioners for next year's budget on some of the changes to make the parking system work better. And some form of off-street long-term parking is part of the recommendation to make the short-term meters work on Rehoboth Avenue. It's not the whole thing, but it's sort of the chicken and the egg thing too. So there's some pieces of this that kind of fit in whether it makes sense or not. And I think the public doesn't have all of that yet because we don't have it all yet. So.
Well, and I think my question then that follows up on that is, are we maximizing the use of the parking that is available in the city, in that the south end of the boardwalk even on the first block, is not even parked up on a lot of days. But there's no restroom down there. So part of, if you told people, if you want to go to the beach, turn here, go down there, and there's plenty of places for you to park. If you put meters on that whole first block of the boardwalk, it's prime parking as what your committee had come up with as far as the boardwalk's concerned. If you've got meters on the first block that people can put 12 hours on a meter, you provide a place for them to use a restroom, even if it's a small restroom that's down there somewhere on the South Boardwalk, that may be cheaper than putting up a parking garage or taking risk to do something like that. I think my only question is, back to what you said, we don't know at this point if we're even maximizing the use of parking because there isn't signage to reroute people to where they could possibly park on a crowded day.
You just made an excellent point that I have never even considered. Maybe people don't park there because there is not a bathroom to use, which is.
There's no bathroom from Delaware Avenue all the way to the end of the boardwalk.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
when you
I think that is a reason why a lot of people don't go to that part of the beach area to park. But I also recollect that there were a number of residents in that area who strongly objected to having restrooms put in front of their homes.
Well, but the point that I'm making is that we're not talking about a porta potty. We're talking about there's water access on the ends of Sun Street down there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you put a small restroom like where you have a pavilion, just a place. But I'm only just saying, to get back to topic, do we know right now that we are maximizing the usage of the parking spaces that are available? And are we letting people know there are options to their parking? Those two questions may drive whether we need a garage or not.
And that's been a long time, issue here. And the fact is that people want to park closer to wherever Rehoboth Avenue that points to, and wherever. That's the main focus of, and that's shown with the results of the parking revenue this year up and through July. We've had a significant increase. Of course, we've had great weather all summer, but there is and we increased the hourly parking by $1. So, I mean, those numbers will come out and you'll see that, but everyone congregates to the center of town and Rehoboth Avenue and that center point bandstand and where the beach is. On any day, as you know, you can walk around and see open parking.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, please keep going. I was thinking about something that happened, this honest to God happened this weekend. I saw this same car driving in a circle around Sussex, past the Starbucks on 4th, Sussex, and the guy was, slowing down and he had his window open. I said, and it was after 5 o'clock. And I said, there's parking on 4th Street, and right there, it's free, like a block away. I pointed down there was plenty of parking. He said, oh, no, it's too far to walk. True story.
2 blocks.
So he drove around. It must have, because I was with the dog, so I was watching for about 15 minutes.
It's no different than people
was
driving through a
fascinating.
parking lot until they get the row they want or whatever, because 20 feet away is too far to walk.
And that's not a judgment call by any chance. Maybe he was handicapped. I don't know. But the point is, people do want to park closer to where they
The
want
answer to your question, I think, is the signage program is going to help, certainly, because although we don't have the I haven't been part of it, so I don't know all the details, but, theoretically, it's going to direct to short-term, long-term, things like that. The second part of it is, you can go 7 blocks away, and there's plenty of parking, but in the industry, it's line of sight and 2 blocks.
Right.
So I will walk 7 blocks when I can see where I'm going. If I can't see where I'm going, it's 2 blocks. And so those are the 2 key things to always keep in mind.
But I think that's a valid point, and it's why none of us are completely convinced that we need a parking garage. And I think that circles us back to Kent's points on that's probably one of the the updates for the commissioners, and we should get on a workshop meeting and it should be a discussion point. And I think Kent articulated 5 or 6 of the key points pretty well.
But I think one of the things that we have a tendency to And I applaud Linda and her committee for their patience in this, but I think we have to look at all of these things as part of the same solution to the challenges that we face, and not, because if we cherry pick things, if we get a list of 15 things and we pick 3, it kind of skews the outcome. And we're living through that now, because, without getting too far off topic, but because of the increase to the meter rates and the reduced times on Rehoboth Avenue, some of the businesses are having some challenges. And so I think, when I think of a parking garage, I don't think of an either or. I think of, this is part of an overall strategy that we need to consider, and not in individual pieces, but in an aggregate solution. And that there's more reasons than just the available parking and where it is to be in favor of a parking garage. We haven't talked about, where do employees who work in the city, where do they park? That's still a big challenge for us. And there's other things too, that would the businesses on Rehoboth Avenue do better if we had that line of sight in 2 blocks, question and answer? And so I don't think we're ready to make a judgment call on whether we should be pro garage or con garage. I think we need to continue to incorporate that as part of the overall strategy of looking at what the ultimate solution is going to be, not for this year, next year, but for 10 years, 15, 20 years. And so I think that we can churn this all we want, but it's not going to change anything. So I would propose that we continue to pursue this with the best information that we have. If the mayor and the commissioners decide that it's not worth pursuing, that they're empowered to make that determination. But until that happens, I think we should just be, trying to gather the best information we can as timely as we can, get it before the right people to make decisions, make sure that the folks who have an interest in this from the community, from the business community, are heard and have opportunities to speak to it, but that we we kind of view this without a lot of emotion, and just try to keep that part of it, the strategic part of it, moving forward.
So to Kent's point, is that kind of what the group, maybe this is what you were gonna say, Sharon, to Kent's point, does the group kind of agree that we take forward the information we've learned to date, and then lay out that there's 2 options right now: table this till we get, for whatever reasons, or go forward with some sort of RFI to continue our research? Is that kind of where we are right now?
Yes, I mean, let's kind of come together, and is that what the committee wants to do at this point, just to bring this forward to the commissioners at their September 9th workshop? Does that work?
Yes.
Or,
I think if they have updated information, I like, Steve, your comment that it's almost, there's a side of me that would like to see in 10 years from now, I would like the parking in Rehoboth to look like this. Therefore, in 5 years, it should probably look like this. And therefore, our key goal for the next 2 years should probably be this. If there were an overall big picture in my mind right now, after you just made your comment, and I knew where the parking garage fit in the big plan, then maybe some of those questions about how to do it or what needs to come first, maybe that's where we are right now, is where's the big plan for 10 years from now, so we know where this garage is.
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm challenged with is we have a lot of conversation in town here about trying to solve a problem that existed 20, 30 years ago. And maybe it's gotten worse, but this is an opportunity for us to kind of take it forward and look forward to where we want to be. And Kathy, I really applaud you for saying that, because I mean, I think that's what the planning commission's working on. That's what the mayor asked the commissioners to all kind of give their vision, and I think we we don't want to ignore what's happened because we're better informed by what history tells us. But I really think that we have an opportunity here, and I like calling it like the mobility center because it's more than just a parking garage. It's really kind of the future logistical enhancement for the city, and so that's why I would caution against basing our reaction to it on what we know today and kind of think more about what we would all like to see. And we can disagree, but what we, to the degree that we can collectively agree on things, what we would like to see for the future.
Steve, you made the perfect point on and the strategy and the big picture, and this is the perfect time to be having that conversation. Right. As a city, we're looking at the comprehensive development plan, and 10 years out. So this is the perfect time to be having that discussion and looking at.
And I think this information that we're talking about now, and that we'll hopefully capture enough of it, it makes it the decision and the recommendations and the strategy better informed going forward. And a lot of what I think a lot about what Linda has said at meetings when she's presented to the mayor and the commissioners about we just can't take a one-off approach to a strategy for meeting the challenges that we face for parking and traffic flow. We have to kind of look at them in concert so that it's not a bunch of soloists, but it's an orchestra.
Yeah, I think from my perspective as the Planning Commission representative here, I get a little bit concerned, just generally speaking, that a lot of issues are being considered by various bodies within the city. And I oftentimes am concerned that sometimes people are moving in a direction before the Planning Commission, particularly at this point in time with the CDP being our primary focus, because it's something that we're mandated to do, that we look at this from an overall perspective. And as Kathy said, I'd like to know where we're going to be 10 years from now. That's specifically the objective of the CDP process that we're undertaking now. And, where are we going to be 5 years from now and 2 years from now? So I would hope that no one moves ahead with, major changes to the structure of the city before all the interested parties have had a chance to provide their input. And at some point in time, the Planning Commission will be holding, a charrette or, a public meeting at which, the downtown area and parking and all of the, mixed use and everything is going to be taken into consideration as we develop, our 10-year plan for the city.
When's that due to be published?
Well,
Just remind me, I'm sorry.
It is due next July, technically.
And there could be an extension.
There can be an extension, and I have a feeling we may need to request an extension. We haven't, unfortunately, in my view anyways, just speaking personally, made as much progress on that as I had hoped we would at this point. But we still have a long way to go in terms of information gathering, just as we're doing here. I mean, I think Kent, really laid out very well, the approach that I would certainly favor and what our objective should be at this point. But I think all of the interested parties should have, their opportunity to sort of provide input to the Planning Commission, provide input to this task force, and certainly provide input to the Parking Committee, as well as, certainly the mayor and the commissioners. But I would hope that any recommendation or decision as to what the city's going to do with respect to the parking garage or other matters, doesn't put the cart before the horse, I guess.
Yeah, but we can control that. I mean, I kind of view all of these meetings and different committees and commissions can all be complementary to each other. They don't have to be working in contradiction to each other, or that it's a horse race and one's out in front of the other. I think we have an opportunity to influence the pace. My concern is that if we kind of say, well, we don't want that. I mean, I think if we gain momentum in certain areas, it may influence the speed to which we move on some other things, so that everybody's running just a little bit faster instead of, one who's kind of opposed, kind of slowing everything down. And so I'm not suggesting in any way that what we should be focused on is trying to drive some type of outcome that isn't consistent with an overall strategy that would come about through all the great work that the Planning Commission does. And all these things I think tie together if we are smart enough to view it strategically rather than just tactically.
So you're thinking that we should still run tandem with, and keep our momentum here?
I do.
And,
But I agree with everything that Kent said. I mean, I think as far as what we present to the mayor and the Board of Commissioners is, I wish I'd have been writing fast because I think he did do a great job of capturing that. But I think we can do things, I think we can do things simultaneously rather than have it be kind of one after the other. I don't think it has to be done that way. Because we're not investing a lot of time the meetings, it's a lot of time and energy, but between meetings, we can certainly be doing things that can be presented here to get a consensus before they go forward, right?
So sorry, Steve, I
No.
know it's 10 o'clock, people said they had to leave. So is there a consensus among this group as we go in terms of the meeting with the commissioners that we do go forward with some sort of RFI to get the information to feed in? Is there consensus among this group that we go
what
forward?
I heard is we're gonna go to the commissioners on September 9th and give them an update of where we are.
Right.
And then proceed with an RFI if the commissioners want us to proceed.
Yes.
Well, but they'll ask what our recommendation is, and what is
Yes.
our recommendation? Do
I don't think we have one
consensus?
yet. I mean, my recommendation is that we go out for an RFI.
Yeah, me
Yes.
too, that's what I'm saying.
I don't have any, I mean, I think
Yeah,
that's
that's
our
what I
recommend,
think.
I put that as a motion. I mean, I think the recommendation at this point should be that we want an RFI rather than an RFP so that we can gather, and there's a couple more points on this that I would add
Yes.
based on today's discussion. And then go from there. I think that is the responsible way to move forward at this point, to gather the information that we need to finally present it for an RFP.
I agree 100%. And again, it's all about trying to get a more complete picture of if and how a parking garage could fit into the overall strategy. And so it's not, hey, we're asking permission to, contract for something.
Right.
Right now, I think we see a lot of gaps in the information that we have, and this is one way to fill in some of those gaps.
I think we could just, I'm sorry, Lisa, I think we just add to that when we're speaking to the commissioners that we'd like to go down the path of going for an RFI, but data is still coming in. We're still having discussions, and we are gonna, here's the key points, and we are gonna work in tandem with the parking committee and the planning commission and the CDP. And it may, as we go down this path, it'll take a while to put together an RFI. And it may, in that process, we may decide to recommend we put it on hold. I mean, I'm still hearing things that.
But there's nothing that commits any of us to anything
With an RFI.
with an RFI.
Okay, well.
And we're just trying to see if there's enough interested people out there, if they rate, because one of the things that my experience indicates is that we'll get a lot of questions that we haven't even thought about. And so the nature of those questions can be very informative. And
You mean
so
questions from the vendors?
Exactly,
Yes,
exactly.
absolutely.
And that's why,
at the
because
same time,
it's almost like a dialogue that you're having, an informal dialogue. They have to protect themselves in divulging too much information. We have to make sure we don't overcommit, but by the nature of an RFI, you're not overcommitting, because all you're saying is that we have this is something that we're considering. Do you have an interest? And if you do, tell us more about how you would do it.
I'm very glad you stated it just as you stated it, because along with questions we're gonna get from those companies then is from the public.
Yeah.
They're hearing all sorts of mixed messages on this parking garage task force as we go on, and there's a lot of pros and cons and fors and against. So I think you laid it out very well. Hopefully that's the part that'll get printed, because we want everyone to know that this is just simply to get better information, that we are doing our homework thoroughly.
Hey, and if we swing and miss, we swing and miss.
Yeah.
But it's like if you don't know until you do it.
in the interest of time, I mean, I would make a motion that we present to the commissioners our proposal that we then solicit for an RFI. And I think the RFI can come from this information plus a few more things that we've talked about. You know, and the explanation for the motion is that if we don't get the information, we're never gonna move this forward. So we have to have something to be able to say, boy, this is a dumb idea, or this is a great idea.
Right, and we don't have enough information to even make a recommendation along those lines.
I second your motion.
So there's a motion on the floor to present to the mayor and commissioners a proposal to pursue an RFI with stating objectives and, any second?
I need a clarification, only because the way I heard what you said, Sharon, and I may have misunderstood, is that your new updated information will be given to the commissioners. And then the commissioners will discuss whether or not they choose to go forward. And then an RFI would be the next part of the plan.
Correct.
Did I understand
Yeah.
correctly?
That's true.
Because if the commissioners say, you know what, there's too much, we don't even want to touch our infrastructure, then why are we going out for an RFI?
Right.
Okay,
So-
that's my whole point, that even though we're recommending an
They might say
RFI,
no.
it still
Yeah.
comes back to.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify.
No, and
that.
again, to Rick's point.
With my commissioner hat on, would want to know what the committee's recommendation
Yeah.
is.
Which is-
and which
to-
is
we're
to go
requesting
forward
their-
with an RFI. At least that's the
to be-
motion.
Yeah,
to-
and that's what I understood, I just
Got it.
wanted to be sure I had the process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to Rick's point, I mean, this process has multiple steps in it.
Yeah.
And we're interjecting, I would suggest smartly, additional steps because we have, you know, reviews and approvals of things that we do. And that keeps it from getting too far out ahead of anything that would be of a concern to the planning commission.
So we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor?
I would just like to see that whatever is presented to the Board of Commissioners, we see in writing. And I think the objective and the reasons why that Steve laid out is perfect. Ken articulated some of the things that we've learned in the past few months, and I think that should be a part of what's presented.
I know we have a motion, but for the discussion, I would answer that this is the basis of it, adding a couple pieces that we talked about today, which would include insurance.
Yeah.
And what's not on here, and I thought we had it, was the anticipated hard and soft cost of the city.
Yeah, my bad.
It's missed, so just so that you know, that was one of the
Yeah.
objectives or outcomes was, because that's critical, so those two pieces would be added to this.
Yeah.
Plus any,
So are we in the middle of a vote, or?
I think so.
Yes, we're in the middle.
We were
Sorry, I've
discussing.
only just moved, I'm not trying to stop discussion, I just know a couple people had to leave at 10, so I'm trying to respect that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
From the city manager, you said earlier that this is not a sanctioned committee.
It's a branch, if you will, of the mayor and
What?
commissioners. It's
It's not a sanctioned committee, is it?
Yes, it is
No,
a
it is,
sanction
it
committee.
is. It's not a committee,
You
but
said it's not a sanctioned
I think you
committee.
meant it's not a standing committee, it was right, and a
Exactly,
task force
exactly.
asked to look at a
yeah,
specific.
we were tasked with, bringing this forward one way or the other. So all those in favor, any objection? Nope. Okay, I'm just gonna move because we just, any new business? I think we're all on the old business.
Yeah.
Can we just
I
talk about
did
business?
wanna get public comment in here, okay? So is there any public comment? Yes. Would you please come to the microphone?
I'm gonna excuse myself, I need to get.
Yeah, come up to the mic.
Normally Burton Derrickson, I've lived here since I was 11. on
And your address,
Philadelphia
please?
Street. Pardon me?
Your address, please, name and address.
49 Tidewaters.
Great,
now, But
thank
still property owner.
Yes.
Okay, I think the discussion was great, but I think you have to consider how busy the boardwalk is. It's packed. You have to consider the beach, it's packed. When 20 years ago, we didn't have all these subdivisions with all these day trippers coming in. They bring their trash, they change their clothes. I have a picture on my phone I can show you. At the end of the street here on Rehoboth Avenue, They pour buckets on themselves because I go to Louis and get food that I shouldn't be eating, but anyway. And the Wall Street Journal had an article on crowd control. A lot of the day trippers aren't spending any money. They come and they leave. They bring their food, they bring their chairs, they use the toilets, they use the free water, and they change their clothes on the street, on the boardwalk. So I think we have other problems besides parking. And parking has been a problem, and it'll always be a problem, but you also have crowd control now. That was never a problem 20 years ago. And on 24 now, there are gonna be 4,000 new homes going up. So that's more people, they're coming here because of the beach. They're not going to other areas. And this city, the sidewalks, the boardwalk, it's a mile long. It can only handle so many people. And the quality of life for the people here is deteriorating with the quality of some things that are happening. And when I see the hotel that may go up on the boardwalk, that will enhance, and people that wanna spend money and won't be using the running water to change their clothes on the boardwalk, which people are doing now, and redressing right at the end of Rehoboth Avenue. And you can't walk in front of the toilets on Rehoboth Avenue because so many people are standing around there. And I think the buses should have to stop at Convention Hall. If you're concerned about the people, you should want the businesses to have the exposure. And then they'd have to walk through the businesses and seeing what they have to offer. Because in the spring, we had 18 stores to rent in Rehoboth. So we do have a situation with quality of life and overcrowding. That's my point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Normally, Martin Derrick's. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll give you this, Wall Street Journal, overcrowding is a problem. And if you go on the boardwalk, you can walk there and get on the beach.
Thank you.
Good morning, Walter Birmingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. I am neither for nor against the parking garage or facility. I was made aware of the comments, I haven't read about it in the newspaper, that allegedly that Max and Kevin made about the problems in the lot where possible parking garage might be installed. Not necessarily in order, but maybe to educate you, whatever, and to educate you. Maybe we need something from Max, because I don't think I have it, who and what agencies are located on the water tower and how their communications and control devices, where do they originate? So as a quickie education, and not trying to take your time, you need to understand with Streetscape Verizon at the time, that was their name, they replaced, and they were only allowed to replace what was in the street beforehand. They could not run fiber optics or anything. They could only run stuff right down Rehoboth Avenue, so they put a duct bank, D-U-C-T, duct bank, down Rehoboth Avenue in certain laterals, one of which went into City Hall. More recently in time, you may have seen contractors working on Rehoboth Avenue in the medians with the manholes open, one of which was in front of City Hall and also down by 2nd Street, where they added turns and board and got bypass different methodologies, got paths to the water tower. Over time, first of all, I'd like to tell you, and maybe you know, maybe you don't know, 911 is no longer powered by Verizon. It's powered, I believe, by Windstream, which is a different corporation. The city's data, I believe, is supplied by Comcast. I don't know what path it gets into the City Hall. But back to 911 circuits, a lot of that is also connected by Verizon and other companies. I don't know what's on the water tower of the state of Delaware has 911 up there, but we have items that go to the water tower that don't go across from City Hall over to the water tower. Back before the building was finished, Leonard Talecki called me, and Chuck's aware of this, and you were going to dig across the parking lot to get fiber optic from the firehouse over to the police trailers. Well, we knew of conduits that already existed. So on Saturday and Sunday, Leonard and I went out there and located it and were able to, so you didn't have to dig up the lot out there, get a path to make it a lot easier. But one of the things that has popped into my mind as I sat here today, and I don't know how far out this might be, but don't get hung up on the fuel tank behind the firehouse. I helped plan it, so did Chuck and many others. We did it ourselves. We did the tower. Other than putting it up in the air, we poured the base and everything else. But natural gas may come, and if it comes, it's possible the firehouse, we might work completely around an oil tank that might be taken out of the ground and not replaced. We could end up with natural gas in there, and you spend a lot of money worried about something that you might not need to worry about at all. I think roadblocks, I feel at the last meeting, roadblocks were put in intentionally or not intentionally to block the garage. You should keep it open, keep the discussion going, and you should find out from people that have been around here what's going on. You have people on the committee Kent, and I think maybe John, that don't even know what's going on between the firehouse. And when this building was being built, local people were blown away. You didn't care to hear from us, the commissioners. We couldn't get holes in the side of the building, and finally they came back and you had to pay extras for the holes in the side of the building. They didn't make holes for holiday lighting. You can't call it Christmas lighting. And we asked to have thoughts for the paths going to the water tower be straight lines to consider the future foundation of a possible parking garage. Blown away, none of it mattered. So the conditions that came up at the last meeting were all created by the city, the past administration, Mr. Cooper, and Mr. Kuhn's administration, and many of the sitting and previously sitting commissioners. And it would be nice if people would ask some questions. We know about the aeration basin that used to be over in Martin's Lawn. That line runs underneath Rehoboth Avenue, underneath the firehouse, underneath behind here, underneath the breakers, and all the way to the lake. We sat out here and watched the erosion and the water move the soil down into the lake, and you're sitting here previous at the front table having discussions about erosions and people not wanting to dredge the lake, and the city created the problems. There was so much that went wrong because there was no local environment. You should be asking for input, and you should keep up the work to decide whether or not the parking garage is appropriate, but it needs to come back, and you're running too fast, and Kathy, you're right on target.
Thank you. Anyone else? Carol?
Sharon, I apologize. I'm out of order because I am on the task force. It just wasn't a seat, so I didn't want to interrupt the meeting. I just want to let you know, because the chamber was such a strong supporter of the parking garage, which really means long-term parking. So what Kathy said about having a plan, it's systematic, here's where we want to be in 20 whatever, here's the time frame we're going to do that, the system we're going to get there, and here's where the funds are going to come to do that. We would be totally in support of that, and my vote would absolutely be with your vote you made today and request for information.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Okay, with that, we'll, next meeting, do you want to consider that after the commissioners' meeting, or do you want to set a next meeting now?
We can always set a next meeting and
Okay.
then cancel it if we find out that we don't need to meet.
The commissioners is what,
But I would say set a tentative date just because we have everybody here.
Commissioners' meeting is September 9th,
I will not be there.
okay? You know, that's another question. Do you want to go ahead and meet with the commissioners September 9th? There are 2 new commissioners coming in for the October workshop. Or you
Maybe
wanna-
we should wait till October.
To
Well,
do
one
the,
of the new
are you
commissioners
saying
is
when
yours.
to meet? We're not talking about when we're meeting again, right
No,
now,
no.
we're talking
I'm
about
talking
when
about
to
bringing it forward to
present,
the commissioners.
whatever time.
There's,
frame
look,
you-
so
There's 2 new commissioners that will be seated in at the October workshop.
That might be the best time to do it.
I'd
when you've
actually,
got-
you've got one of them here, and I would be in favor with an RFI, and I would very much like to get the opinion of the outgoing commissioners.
Okay?
That's a,
And I,
Well,
that's a
Alright,
really
that's a
good
good
point.
point.
That's a good
That's
point.
really good point.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we'll take this to the commissioners on September 9th. The next meeting, we usually meet on a Friday.
The 20th?
September 20th?
Not for me, sorry. 27th is open.
27th is good.
27th is open for me, too.
Not for me.
Okay.
Okay. Wait, October?
So I think we should pick one of the two, though, either the 20th or the 27th. But we need to have you here, so, okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Maybe
have to be on
October
Friday.
4th, yeah.
September,
How about the 25th, maybe shift it to a Wednesday? Would that work?
25th is fine.
25th works.
Good with me.
Are you here?
Yes.
What about you, Bob?
25th is.
Kathy?
I'm good.
It's fine with me.
Everybody else good?
Okay.
Fine.
Next meeting is Wednesday, September 25th
At 9?
at 9 a.m., as long as the room is open.
Yeah.
We'll confirm that. Okay.
What
Thank
time,
you.
Sharon?
9 a.m.?
September 25th?
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good point. My concern is you have.
Thank you for taking my sideways talking and making sense out of it.
Ones that are going out, but if you're looking at some, you know.
So,
And I don't know
I
what
don't
situation
have,
is,
a-
but I think getting it revised.
I don't see anyone.
I can send it to you.
Can't imagine
just
how
add
it would be
these-
built.
If you, I mean, we can do it one of two ways. I can either, because I thought I had sent it, but you can either send to me and I'll
That's right at the end
maintain
of Rehoboth.
control over edits. So if you just send